I never thought my own blood would look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't good enough. But that night, with the clink of champagne glasses and their smug grins, I learned just how far family could fall. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It really helps us out. The restaurant smelled of rosemary and seared steak. Soft jazz playing under the low hum of expensive conversations. My hands rested on the tablecloth, calloused from decades of building a life for the very people now sitting across from me, people who would soon show me they'd forgotten every sacrifice I'd ever made. My son, Daniel, leaned back in his chair, wearing a $2,000 suit I knew he didn't pay for. My daughter, Melissa, sat beside him, scrolling her phone, her diamond bracelet catching the dim light. My eldest grandson, Tyler, whispered something to her, and they both chuckled, glancing at me like I was the punchline. I tried to keep my voice.com. You two seem distracted. Melissa didn't even look up, just talking about how crazy the prices here are. Not sure this place is. You, Dad. Daniel smirked. Yeah, no offense, but I'm not sure you can afford dinner. Here, they do things differently in the city. It was like a slap. I'd worked my whole life, put both of them through college, paid off their cars, given them the down payment for their first homes. And now, at 74, I was apparently too broke to eat with my own children. I set down my water glass. Is that what you think of me now? That I can't afford a steak? Daniel shrugged. It's not about the steak, Dad. It's about lifestyle. You retired, sold the old house in Oak Ridge for what? $300,000. That doesn't last long around here. Melissa finally put her phone down. We're just saying, maybe you should stick to diners. This place is above your bracket. I took a slow breath. The younger me would have exploded, but age teaches you to hold the fire until it counts. Flashback 30 years ago. Daniel was 12, Melissa 9. I was working 16-hour days at the lumberyard. There were nights I'd come home too, tired to eat, but I'd still sit at the kitchen table with them, asking about their day, smiling through the ache in my bones. We didn't have much, but we had respect. At least I thought we did. Back in the present, I studied my children's faces. They weren't ashamed. Then came the final twist of the knife. When the waiter arrived with the menus, Daniel waved him off. Actually, we'll take care of our part. Could you bring my father a small salad? Something light, within budget. The waiter froze, eyes darting to me. Melissa giggled under her breath. That's when I knew LA didn't just doubt me. They wanted me to feel small. I gave the waiter a polite smile. Actually, young man, bring me the ribeye rare and a bottle of your best red. Melissa rolled her eyes. Tad, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at the mahogany paneling, the high ceilings, the way the light reflected off the brass fixtures. This place wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement, and in that moment, I decided if they thought I couldn't afford dinner, I'd make sure they understood just how wrong they were. Dinner passed in awkward silence. I let their comments slide, kept my focus on the prime cut in front of me. The steak was excellent, but the satisfaction came from the plan forming in my head. When the bill came, Daniel made a show of sliding his card across the table. I'll take care of mine and Melissa's. Dad, you got yours? I pulled out my wallet, not my debit card, but the black credit card they didn't know I had. The kind you only get when the bank knows your worth. The waiter raised his eyebrows as he processed it, glancing at me with respect my children couldn't. Mustard. The card cleared instantly. Of course, Melissa's voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, look at that. Dad can still buy dinner. I just smiled. Oh, Melissa, dinner was the cheapest thing I'm buying tonight. They didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. That night, I went home to my quiet little house. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest, but it was paid for outright. The walls were lined with photographs. My late wife, Linda, with her gentle smile. Pictures of the kids before life and money had hardened them. I poured myself a whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, thinking, see, my children assumed I'd spent most of my savings. They didn't know about the investments I'd made back when I was still working a few parcels of land outside the city, a stake in a trucking company, and, most importantly, the cash I'd set aside for opportunities. Opportunity had just walked into my life wearing a red velvet tablecloth and charging $120 for a ribeye. The restaurant was called Harper & Sons. I remembered reading an article about it a year ago. The owner, Jim Harper, had built it from the ground up. But word was, business wasn't as good as it looked. I picked up the phone. Harper & Sons, this is Jim, came a tired voice. Evening, Jim. This is Thomas Walker. I was in your place tonight. I hear you might be open to selling. Silence. Then, cautious. Who told you that? Let's just say I pay attention. I'd like to make an offer. The next week was a blur of quiet meetings and paperwork. Jim was reluctant at first, but when I put $2.1 million on the table, cash, no loans, his resolve melted down. On Friday afternoon, I signed the final papers. Harper & Sons was mine, but I didn't want my kids to know. Not yet. No, they were going to find out the right way, sitting in that same dining room, at that same table. When the entire place belonged to the man they said couldn't afford dinner. The night of the reveal came faster than I expected. I called Daniel and Melissa, told them I wanted to make up for the awkward dinner. My treat, I said. When they arrived, they walked in like they owned the place. Melissa in a gold dress, Daniel shaking the host's hand like they were old friends. Reservation for Walker, Daniel told the host. The host smiled at me instead. Ah, Mr. Walker, right this way. They led us to the best table in the house, corner booth, full view of the floor. Melissa frowned. Since when? Do they treat you like royalty here? I sipped my water, waiting. Halfway through the meal, the pianist stopped playing. Jim Harper himself, now just a friendly employee, stepped onto the small stage with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement. As of today, Harper & Sons is under new ownership. Please welcome the man who made it possible. Mr. Thomas Walker. Gasps. Applause. Every eye in the place turned to me. Daniel's jaw dropped. Melissa blinked like she'd misheard. I stood, calm as the ocean before a storm. Thank you, Jim. Folks, I'm just a man who appreciates good food and good people, and to my family. I turned to my children. I guess I can afford dinner after all. Their faces burned red, but what I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning, 'cause the restaurant was more than a business. It was a door, and once it opened, I'd uncover a betrayal so deep it would shake the ground beneath my feet. Owning Harper & Sons should have been the sweetest victory of my life. But within a week, I learned that revenge is only satisfying when you know the whole truth. And the truth was about to cut deeper than anything my children had said to me. The applause from that night still echoed in my mind as I sat in my new office upstairs, a small but well-kept room overlooking the dining floor. The smell of fresh bread baking drifted in through the vents. Teas, and I could hear the low hum of dinner service below. On my desk lay the purchase contract, a copy of the liquor license, and a set of master keys. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt unsettled. Something about Daniel and Melissa's reaction had gnawed at me all week. The shock I expected that, okay? But there had been something else. A flicker in Daniel's eyes. Not just a surprise, but recognition. 2 days after the reveal, got my first clue. I was going through some old ledgers Jim had left behind, invoices, vendor contracts, payroll records, when I noticed something strange. There was a catering invoice from 6 months ago, marked paid in cash. The event had been hosted at a private estate just outside the city. The name on the invoice stopped me cold. Daniel Walker. I leaned back in my chair, reading it again to make sure I wasn't seeing things. My son had hired Harper & Sons for an event before I owned it. Curiosity turned into a low burn in my chest. I called Jim into the office. Jim, this invoice from February, you catered for Daniel Walker. Jim rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, I remembered that. Big crowd, expensive wine. Thought it was odd he paid in cash, but he tipped well. I frowned. Did he mention me? Jim hesitated. Said you were his father, but also that you didn't have much to do with the family anymore. Sounded, I don't know, like you weren't on great terms. I stared at the paper. So my own son had been using this restaurant to host his fancy gatherings, all while telling me I couldn't afford to be here. The more I dug, the more I found. There were 3 other events tied to names I recognized. Melissa's best friend, Daniel's business partner, even my grandson's 21st birthday. It's all catered here. It wasn't just hypocrisy. It was deliberate. They'd been enjoying this place for years. It's never with me. I didn't confront them right away. No, I've learned that in life, and especially in revenge, timing is everything. Instead, I started making quiet changes. I upgraded the menu, brought in a new chef, and put my own stamp on the place. I also added a private ledger, tracking every booking. Then, one afternoon, a booking came in under the name Everett Holdings. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except the phone number matched Daniel's office. I called the number myself. Everett Holdings. This is Jessica. Hi, Jessica. This is Thomas Walker. I believe Mr. Walker booked a dinner party with us. She hesitated, then said, yes, for next Thursday. 30 guests. Perfect, I said. Please don't tell him I called. When Thursday came, I dressed in my best suit and stayed in my office until the party was in full swing. Through the glass, I could see Daniel at the head of the table, laughing with his business associates, all charm and confidence. Then I made my entrance. Evening, folks, I said, walking right up to the table. Daniel's smile faltered. Dad, what are you doing here? Oh, just checking in on my guests. You see, I turned to the group. I owned the place. Murmurs spread around the table. Daniel tried to laugh it off. Yes, my father's involved here. Not involved, I corrected. I own it outright, which means I also know who books what and who's been enjoying this restaurant behind my back for years. Daniel's jaw tightened. This isn't the time. No, son, I said, leaning in just enough for only him to hear. The time is coming. Hey, when it does, you'll wish you'd kept me close. I left before he could respond. That night, I drove home under a sky heavy with clouds. The air smelled like rain. I should have felt satisfied, but instead, my mind was racing. Why had my children gone out of their way to exclude me from something they clearly loved? Linda would have known. She always could read between the lines. But Linda was gone, taken by cancer 12 years ago. And after she passed, something in the family broke. Flashback, 12 years ago, the house smelled of lilies from the funeral. Daniel stood in the kitchen, already on the phone with the bank, talking about liquidating assets. Melissa sat at the dining table, flipping through Linda's jewelry like she was browsing a catalog. I remember saying, "Your mother isn't even in the ground a week, and you're talking about money?" Daniel had looked at me coldly. "We're just being practical, Dad. You're not getting any younger." The memory still stung. And now, owning the restaurant wasn't enough. I needed answers. The break came a week later when one of my new managers, a sharp young guy named Peter, came to my office with a folder. "Mr. Walker, you should see this. These are old reservation logs I found in storage." Inside were years' worth of names, dates, and notes. And scattered through them were events booked not just by Daniel and Melissa, but by Everett Holdings, going back over 5 years. Why would my son's company be hosting so many private dinners? Can't why here, of all places? I called Peter back in. Do we have any financials tied to these events? He nodded. Yeah, but you're not gonna like it. The numbers were huge, thousands of dollars per night, always paid in cash or by company card. And then I saw the kicker. One of the early payments had been marked discount, family connection. Family connection. I didn't own the place back then, so who in my family had been connected to Harper and Sons? That's when I realized I've been thinking too small. This wasn't about a fancy restaurant or a few cruel words over dinner. There was something bigger, and my own children were in the middle of it. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they were starting to. I decided I'd find the rest, even if I had to dig through every record this place had ever kept. The next day, I drove to see Jim Harper. He was out of the business now, relaxing at his lake house. But he welcomed me with a handshake and a coffee. Jim, I said, I need the truth. Before I bought the place, did my children have any stake here? Jim hesitated. Not directly, but Daniel. He used to bring in a lot of business. He'd send clients here, throw events, said it was good for both of us. Did you ever give him a cut? I asked. Jim's eyes dropped to his cup. Sometimes, not a lot. Just enough to keep the referrals coming. My stomach turned. So Daniel had been quietly profiting from Harper and Sons for years, while telling me I didn't belong here. Driving back to the city, the rain finally started. Heavy, cold drops hammered the windshield. And I knew this was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming something far bigger than dignity. I didn't know it then. But the next step would uncover a secret about my own family. It's one that would make everything else look like child's play. Because there was one thing I hadn't considered. Sometimes betrayal doesn't start with your children. Sometimes it starts with your spouse. You don't reach 74 without learning that betrayal has layers. Just when you think you've uncovered the worst of it, life shows you there's more rot hiding under the floorboards. And in my case, that rot went all the way back to Linda. The thought should have been impossible. Linda had been my wife for 42 years, my partner through lean times and storms. She was the one who'd encouraged me to buy land, to save instead of spend. But the pieces in front of me didn't lie. Daniel's steady connection to Harper and Sons started long before I had any reason to believe he even liked the place. And back then, it's the only person in our family who had ties to anyone in the restaurant industry. It's Linda. The memory hit me on a Tuesday morning. I'd been in my office, staring at a grainy old photograph tucked into a folder Peter had found. It was from 12 years ago. Harper and Sons in its early days. Tables were bare, the walls unadorned. But there, in the corner, was Jim Harper and Linda. They were smiling at each other, not politely, warmly. I could almost hear her laugh in that frozen moment. I called Jim that afternoon. He answered on the second ring. Jim, I found a picture, I said slowly, from your opening year, you and my wife. Silence. Then a long sigh. Thomas, maybe you should come out here. The drive to Jim's lake house felt longer this time. I kept the radio off, letting the road noise fill the cab. Mind kept flipping between suspicion and guilt. Suspicion that there had been something between Jim and Linda, a kid, that I was even thinking it. When I arrived, Jim was on the porch, 2 coffees waiting. We sat in the cool afternoon air. He didn't meet my eyes. I should have told you sooner, he began. Linda helped me start Harper and Sons, not with money, with people. She had connections through that charity work she did, knew the right donors, the right investors. She was good at bringing folks together. I stared at the lake, watching the ripples spread. Why didn't she tell me? She said she didn't want you worrying about it, that you had enough on your plate at the lumberyard. His words were meant to soothe, but they didn't, because if Linda had been involved from the start, then Daniel's connection to the place wasn't random at all. And it meant my children hadn't just found a restaurant. They'd inherited a foothold I never even knew existed. Back at the restaurant, I dug into the oldest files we had, predating most of Jim's digital records. In a dusty cardboard box, under a stack of menus, yellowed with age, I found it, a list of original silent backers of Harper and Sons. There it was, in black ink. Linda Walker, to 5% stake. 5%. All these years, my wife had owned part of the restaurant, quietly, without telling me, and when she passed, where had that stake gone? But the answer came faster than I expected. Peter walked into my office later that week, holding a manila envelope. These came in from the county records office, Mr. Walker. Transfer documents. Inside was a single page, dated just 3 months after Linda's funeral. Her 5% share transferred to Daniel Walker. No discussion, no signature from me. Just a clean transfer. Witnessed, an NOTA, RIZED. My hands gripped the paper until it crinkled. Daniel hadn't just been using Harper and Sons. He'd been part owner for over a decade, and he'd never said a word. The betrayal felt heavier now. My wife had kept a secret from me. My son had inherited it without my knowledge, and then he'd used that connection to build himself up while pushing me out. I knew then that revenge wasn't going to be enough. I needed justice, but there was still one hole in the story. How had Daniel convinced someone, maybe even a court, to transfer that stake without my consent? I booked an appointment with my old lawyer, Gerald, the same man who'd helped with Linda's estate. His office smelled of cedar and coffee, exactly as it had in the 90s. When I slid the document across his desk, Gerald's face tightened. "I remember this," he said. "Daniel came in after Linda passed, told me she left him a personal letter requesting he'd take over her business interests. Said you were grieving and didn't want to deal with it." My jaw clenched. "Was there a will?" "Yes, and the will left everything to you. But the letter?" He shrugged helplessly. "Legally, it wasn't binding, but I'll be honest, I trusted your boy. Figured it was what Linda wanted." I left Gerald's office with my stomach in knots. I couldn't prove forgery without digging deeper. But my instincts told me that letter was a fabrication. It didn't sound like Linda. It sounded like Daniel. For the next 2 weeks, I played a quiet game. I made no accusations, kept running the restaurant, smiling for the customers, shaking hands with suppliers. But behind the scenes, I hired a private investigator named Jack Delaney, an old friend from my logging days who now made a living digging up what people wanted buried. Jack had a knack for finding paper trails. And 2 weeks later, he delivered. We met in the back booth after closing. He slid a folder across the table. "Daniel's letter from your wife, forged." I found the notary. She was a friend of Daniel's in college. Said she'd notarized it as a favor. A pulse quickened, and the signature, copied from an old Christmas card Linda sent to a charity. Exact same loops, same pressure marks. He didn't even try to disguise it. The proof was right there in black and white. My son had stolen his mother's stake and buried the evidence under a fake letter. That night, I sat in my darkened office long after the staff went home. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. I looked down at the old family photo on my desk. Linda holding a baby Daniel, Melissa clinging to her dress. We'd been so young, so sure that love and hard work could weather anything but greed. Greed was a storm that could erode even the strongest foundations. Didn't sleep. By dawn, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to confront Daniel. He'd deny it, twist it, maybe even destroyed the evidence. No, I had to corner him publicly, somewhere he couldn't wriggle out. And the perfect opportunity was coming up. The restaurant's annual charity gala. It was an old Harper and Sons tradition, tuxedos, a cana, the city's wealthiest, all in one room. Daniel would be there, rubbing shoulders, certain of his place at the top. and in front of every one of them, I dismantle him. In the week leading up to the gala, I made small, deliberate moves. I invited the press under the pretense of announcing a new charitable partnership. I ensured the board of the local business council was in attendance. I even had Peter quietly update the ownership displays in the lobby, one for the past, one for the present, and tucked between them a small plaque with Linda's name, K, and the words, Founding Partner, 2009. The night of the gala arrived, crisp and cold, K, the kind of evening where your breath fogged the air. Guests arrived in limousines, the flash of cameras bouncing off their coats. Inside, the chandeliers glowed like gold, the sound of clinking glasses filling the air. I spotted Daniel within minutes, navy suit, silver tie, glass of scotch in hand. He was in his element, surrounded by half a dozen men hanging on his every word. I let him have his moment. Then, when the pianist paused, I stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. Thank you for joining us tonight. Harper and Sons has always been about family. And tonight, I want to tell you about mine. I saw Daniel's brow furrow. Lessa shifted uncomfortably. In 2009, this restaurant was built not just on fine food, but on the generosity of a few key backers. One of them was my late wife, Linda Walker. The crowd murmured. Daniel's face went pale, and after her passing, I continued. Her stake was meant to pass to me, as stated in her will. But it didn't. Instead, it was stolen, using a forged letter and a dishonest witness spread through the room. Cameras flashed. And the man who did it, I said, locking eyes with Daniel, is standing right here. The silence was electric. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at the crowd, then back at me, and that was when the first reporter shouted a question. Mr. Walker, is this true? Did you forge your mother's letter? The trap had been sprung, but I wasn't done yet, because the evidence was about to hit the table. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. All eyes were bouncing between me and Daniel. Every breath held like the air itself was waiting for the truth. I'd spent decades building a reputation as a man who didn't make wild accusations. So when I spoke that night, they knew I wasn't bluffing. Daniel finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. Dad's confused. He's misremembering. Confused, I said, my voice calm but cutting. No, son, I'm prepared. I motioned toward the side of the stage. Jack Delaney stepped out, holding a small black briefcase. He looked like he'd stepped straight from the shadows, his presence alone adding weight to the air. This, he said, is Jack Delaney, licensed private investigator, and in this case, my witness. Jack set the briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and began laying out the contents. A notarized statement from the so-called witness, a forensic handwriting analysis comparing the forged letter to Linda's old Christmas cards, a copy of Linda's original will. The crowd leaned forward, whispering. Jack spoke for the first time. This letter, the one claiming Linda wanted her 5% transferred to Daniel, is a forgery. The notary admits she signed it without Linda present as a personal favor to Daniel. And the handwriting, identical to samples we know Daniel wrote himself. The murmurs turned into outright gasps. Cameras clicked like machine gun fire. Melissa stepped forward from the edge of the room. Dad, stop this. You're humiliating the family. I looked right at her. No, Melissa, the family humiliated itself. I'm just dragging the truth into the light. Daniel's hands curled into fists. You're doing this because I embarrassed you at dinner. Shook my head. No, son. I'm doing this because you stole from your mother's memory. Okay? You used her kindness to enrich yourself and shut me out. Okay? And then you had the gall to sit across from me and suggest I didn't belong in this restaurant. A restaurant your mother helped build. The business leaders in the room were no fools. They understood what this meant. Daniel's credibility, his company's reputation, his future deals, all hanging by a thread. One man in the crowd, the chairman of the local business council, turned to Daniel and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're finished." Daniel's face flushed deep red. He looked like a man cornered, every possible exit blocked. But I wasn't satisfied with just a public shaming. That would sting, yes, but it wouldn't make things right. So I dropped the final piece of the plan. "Given these facts," I said, turning to the crowd, "I have already taken legal action. As of this morning, a claim has been filed in county court to void the fraudulent transfer and restore my late wife's 5% stake to her rightful estate, mine." I let the silence sit for a beat. "And when the court grants it, I will own not just this restaurant outright, but every dollar Daniel has made from it these past 12 years. Daniel lunged toward the stage, his voice rising. "You can't do this. You're destroying everything." Jack stepped in front of him, calm as a brick wall. "Step back. Son, this isn't the place." Security moved in, my security, not his, and guided Daniel toward the exit. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, no one willing to meet his eyes. Melissa followed, but not before throwing me a look I couldn't quite read, a mix of anger, fear, and something else. Maybe the first flicker of doubt. The rest of the gala moved on in a daze. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes flicking toward me like I was a man they'd underestimated. The press swarmed for comments, but I gave them only one line. Justice isn't revenge. Justice is truth with consequences. Next morning, the story was everywhere. Local businessman accused of forging mother's letter for financial gain, restaurant owner. Publicly confronts son in stunning gala, revealed my phone lit up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some congratulated me. Others offered more dirt on Daniel's past dealings. One message, though, stopped me cold. It was from an unknown number. "You think you know everything, but there's more. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m., booth in the back of Harper & Sons. Alone. Number. Name." Just that. I should have ignored it. The smart play was to focus on the lawsuit. Keep tightening the noose around Daniel. Okay. But something about the tone. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And promises, I've learned, are often where the biggest secrets hide. That night, the restaurant was quiet. We'd closed early to give staff a break after the gala madness. I sat in the dim corner booth, the one where I'd first met Jack. The hum of the refrigeration units was the only sound at exactly 9. The front door creaked open. A woman stepped in who'd pulled over her head, moving like someone who didn't want to be seen. She slid into the booth across from me and lowered the hood. It was Carla Bennett, Linda's closest friend from the old neighborhood. "Carla," I said slowly, "it's been years. I know, Kay, and I'm sorry for not coming sooner." She looked down, fidgeting with her hands. "Thomas, there's something you don't know about Linda's stake in this place." I leaned in. "Go on." She swallowed hard. "Linda didn't just back Jim Harper because she believed in him. She backed him because she was trying to protect you. Kay, that stopped me." "Protect me? From what?" "From your own children," Carla said, her voice low. "Even back then, she saw the way Daniel and Melissa looked at your savings. She worried they'd bleed you dry if something happened to her. She put money into Harper & Sons quietly, hoping it would grow into something stable, something they couldn't touch until she was gone." My chest tightened. "Then why give it to Daniel?" Carla shook her head. "She didn't. Her will left it to you. But she made me promise. If something happened and you were too deep in grief to fight, I'd step aside and let you heal before getting involved." I never imagined Daniel would fake a letter. By the time I realized, it was too late. I sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. Linda had been playing a long game to shield me, and Daniel had turned it into his personal cash cow. And if Carla was telling the truth, there might be more investments, more protections Linda had hidden away. Carla reached into her purse and pulled out a slim notebook. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed. "This," she said, sliding it across the table, "was Linda's. She told me to give it to you if things ever got bad." I opened it carefully. Inside were pages of neat handwriting, dates, amounts, names, not just Harper and Sons, but other ventures I'd never heard of. A storage facility on the east side, a small trucking fleet, even shares in a vineyard upstate. Linda had been quietly building a financial fortress behind my back for me, and if Daniel had been willing to steal the restaurant steak, how long before he went after these two? I closed the book and met Carla's eyes. "Thank you. You've done more tonight than you realize." She gave a sad smile. "Could count, Thomas." For her, when she left, I sat in the booth for a long time, the notebook in front of me. The path was clear now. Step 1, take back the 5% stake legally. Step 2, secure every other asset in Linda's notebook before Daniel even knew they existed. Step 3, use those assets to crush whatever empire he thought he was building. But I also knew something else. Daniel wouldn't go down quietly. The gala had humiliated him. The lawsuit threatened his finances. And if he caught wind of Linda's other holdings, he'd fight with everything he had, which meant the next move had to be surgical. And the first target was the vineyard. Because Daniel didn't know it yet, but that vineyard was about to become the lever that would pry open the rest of his secrets and give me the final piece I needed to end this war once and for all. The next morning, I drove 2 hours north through winding hills and frostbitten vineyards until the road ended at a wrought iron gate. Cedar Glen Vineyard. The name was painted in fading gold across a wooden arch. According to Linda's notebook, she'd quietly bought a small but significant share here 15 years ago. It can, judging by the updated ownership records I had pulled before leaving. No one had touched that share since, which meant it was still mine. As long as I moved fast, the owner, a tall man named Russell Grant, met me at the gate with a handshake. "Thomas Walker," I introduced myself. "I believe my late wife was once an investor here." Russell's eyes lit up. "Linda Walker?" "Absolutely. She saved us in the early years. We've kept her share in trust, never could bring ourselves to cash her out." He led me through rows of leafless vines to a cozy office that smelled of oak and earth. On his desk was a thin folder. Inside was the original investment contract, Linda's name in crisp pen strokes. No amendments, no transfers. I signed the acknowledgement paperwork on the spot. That share was now officially mine. But the vineyard wasn't just a sentimental connection. It was leverage. Russell mentioned something interesting over coffee. "Funny thing, though, your son came sniffing around about a year ago. Wanted to buy in. We turned him down." My eyebrows rose. "Why?" "He didn't have the capital. Said he was restructuring assets. Now I see why. Probably tied up in the city." That was when the idea hit me. If Daniel had tried and failed to buy in before, owning the stake now gave me something he wanted badly. And if I dangled it just right, he'd walk straight into my hands. 2 days later, I called Daniel. My voice was smooth, almost casual. "Son," I said, "we've had our differences, but I'd like to talk. There's an opportunity I think you'll want to hear about." T was wary. "What kind of opportunity?" "It's the kind you missed out on last year. Cedar Glen Vineyard. I own part of it now." There was a pause on the line. "Then, what do you want?" I smiled to myself. "Come by the restaurant tomorrow. We'll talk in person." The next afternoon, Daniel walked into Harper and Sons looking like a man forcing himself to be civil. We sat in the same booth where Carla had given me Linda's notebook. I slid a single page across the table, an official offer to sell my share of Cedar Glen. "The price is high," I said, "but you've always been ambitious." Daniel scanned it, his eyes narrowing. What's the catch? No catch, I said. Just one condition. Drop the fight over the restaurant steak. Sign over any claim you think you have, and the vineyard chair is yours. He leaned back, studying me. You're bluffing. You wouldn't give up that kind of leverage. Maybe, I said, but you'd be walking away from something you've wanted for years. And every day you hesitate, someone else could buy it. Kaya could see the war in his mind. Pride versus greed. In the end, greed won. Fine, he said. Draw up the papers. I had them ready within 24 hours. We met in my lawyer Gerald's office, both of us signing our respective documents in front of witnesses. Daniel walked out holding the deed to a vineyard chair, like it was a crown jewel. He didn't even notice the satisfied look Gerald gave me as we shook hands. Gerald, I said, once Daniel was gone, filed the final motion on the restaurant case. We own it all now. The following week, the court officially voided the fraudulent transfer. Linda's 5% stake and all back profits were restored to me. Daniel was ordered to pay restitution, a sum so large it would wipe out most of his liquidity. And because he'd just tied up his remaining capital in the vineyard chair, he had no cash left to fight back. The public fallout was brutal. Company lost clients. Business council members distanced themselves. The very people who once toasted him at the gala now crossed the street to avoid him. Melissa tried to call me once, but I let it go to voicemail. Okay, I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, but the final blow came not from me, but from the vineyard itself. 3 months after Daniel took over my share, Russell called me. Thomas, you'll never believe this, he said, chuckling. Your son sold his share to a developer. Deal fell through, and now he's out the money and the share. The developer suing him for breach of contract. I didn't laugh, but I did feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing Linda's fortress had done its job, not just protecting me, but ensuring greed destroyed itself. The restaurant thrived under my full ownership. I expanded the menu, hosted more charity events, and made sure Linda's plaque stayed right where it belonged. One evening, a young couple came in, holding hands and smiling. The man shook mine and said, Mr. Walker, your place has the best steak in the city. It wasn't just about the steak. It was about walking into a place people said I didn't belong, and knowing I owned every brick, every beam, every memory. Melissa eventually came by in person. She stood awkwardly at the hostess stand until I walked over. Dad, she said softly, I'm sorry, right? All of it. Daniel's not doing well. I just wanted you to know I never forged anything. I was just stupid. I studied her for a long moment. Melissa, I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, but I'll say this. Respect is earned. If you want to come back into my life, you start there. She nodded, eyes glassy. I understand. As for Daniel, I haven't seen him since the vineyard collapse. I hear bits and pieces, smaller. Apartment, fewer friends, a reputation in tatters. I don't take joy in that. Not exactly. But I do take comfort knowing the truth finally caught up to him on the anniversary of Linda's passing. I came in early before the staff arrived. I sat at our table, the one by the window, where the morning light hits the silverware just right, and poured 2 cups of coffee. I set one across from me, double quotes, Linda. I said, quietly, we did it. They can't touch this place anymore. They can't touch what you built. The coffee went cold, but I stayed there a while, listening to the hum of the city, waking up outside. They told me I couldn't afford dinner here, so I bought the restaurant. But in the end, it wasn't about proving I could. It was about protecting what mattered and making sure the people who forgot where they came from could never rewrite the truth. And that's exactly what I did.